Cults are crazy, but cult leaders are even crazier. That's what we're going to find out about today. After Roch's release from prison in 1984, he would go on to do many horrible things. And I would like to warn anyone who's either squeamish, faint of heart, or disturbed at the thoughts of people messing with the deceased, that this video may not be for you. Still here with me? Then let's explore the dark world of the Anthill kids. We last left Roch in a prison cell awaiting release, and that day came in the month of February of 1984. His followers were anxiously waiting for that date to come. They rented homes in the nearby area just so they could see him. Up until his date of release, they had suggested that they all rent a house in the Quebec area, but upon his release, Roch had a different idea. He wanted a brand new cabin. It's not as if they could return to the old one, as the Eternal Mountain was burnt to the ground by the authorities after Roch's imprisonment. The group headed out to the Somerville Township, a small hamlet by the Birch River in Ontario. One crucial thing to note here is that Roch was moving his little community to an area of Canada where the majority of people only spoke English, and Roch was the only one in his group that spoke fluent English. With this one move, they'd be more isolated than they had ever been. By May of 1984, construction had started on the newest cabin, but something was different this time. Roch was nothing like himself. He began to refer to himself as Roch rather than Roch. As well, he had stopped drinking once again. Though, just because he was off the booze, doesn't mean that Roch wasn't cruel to his followers. They would work the long and hard hours that they had worked on the previous cabin, usually working upwards of 18 hours in a single day. Together, they built a giant cabin which housed a kitchen, bakery, sugar shack, smokehouse, root cellar, as well as a stone sanctuary for Roch to commune with God. They all worked hard, and 4 of the women were pregnant during the construction. After the cabin was finished, women were to be ranked in a hierarchy, as Roch's newest rule. And of course, Maurice Grenier was at the very bottom. Just taking a moment here, one has to wonder why she is even still with the group. I wasn't able to find much information on Maurice Grenier, but she must have been deeply devoted to her husband to still be willing to put up with all of this. I mean, after all, Roch was imprisoned and served a 2-year sentence. With his newfound freedom, Roch would go back to his old ways of torturing Maurice Grenier in various ways. Roch forbid her from sleeping with her husband. As well, he convinced Jacques that she bore the devil's insignia, the classic 666. This in turn was enough of a reason to have Jacques beat his wife. The group was mostly self-sufficient once they had everything established, though they still needed a little extra cash to get by, especially to sate Roch's gluttonal desires. One way that Roch wanted to get these funds was to be considered a family in the eyes of the government, but they didn't see them in that light. The government of Canada saw their little community as a business rather than a household. This meant that Roch would have to resort to other means to get by. He began to steal from local stores, sending out his followers in little conclaves to go to the local town of Lindsay and steal whatever they could get their hands on. They mostly stole food and clothes, and he would even have the women of the group knit specialty lined jackets with deep lined pockets just so they could steal even more. Of course, Roch never took part in these crimes. A godly man such as himself couldn't be seen doing such dastardly deeds. Nor could he risk his probation period. Eventually they were caught though, Jacques being the first of the group, which led to Gabrielle and Nicole shortly thereafterwards. The whole community was banned from the town of Lindsay. This left Roch with only one option. They would sell things by the side of the road to get by, mostly pastries. And with this new business, he needed a name. He named his little group the Anthill Kids over their ant-like work ethic. With the birth of the Anthill Kids, life was seemingly improving for the vast majority of the group, except for Roch. He was getting bored with the monotony of his daily life. So he began to drink once again, starting with a beer a day, which led to 2, to 3, whiskey, bourbon, I'm sure you get the point here. Roch was going back to his drunk ways. and with this drunk behavior, he began to torture his followers once again. They were used for Roch's sick entertainment in a number of ways. Most commonly, he would have two of the women fight naked together for his affection. Or occasionally, he would have one of the men stand naked in a group of women, and then he would instruct the girls to beat on him without any show of mercy. Commonly, Roch would join into the fights between the women, and if you ever hit Roch, it came out of your food rations. They were constantly beaten with the broadside of axes or struck with hammers. If anyone ever sustained an injury, Roch was the man to treat it. All outside hospitals were forbidden. He degraded his followers by either urinating on them or making them rub their own excrement on each other. At one point, he cut open Jock's jugular, and shortly after this, he had the man circumcised. Of course, none of this was without any anesthetic. Even such things as ibuprofen were too much for his community. This wasn't torture though for the group. This was punishment for their unholy deeds. And they praised Roch for helping them get the sin out of their body. Roch was purifying them in the Lord's name, and he wept for them once he was no longer drunk, begging God not to use him as a vehicle for his justice. What a load of crap. Things in the group got so bad that Gabrielle put her 5-month-old child out into the freezing snow and left him there to die, just so he wouldn't have to endure the suffering that the rest of the group endured on a daily basis. She later stated she thought of this as an act of mercy for the infant. Al Lackett, a friend of Roch and county coroner, declared the death of the child as SID, otherwise known as Sudden Infant Death Syndrome. Thankfully, the local Children's Aid Society didn't fall for this, and they began to keep a very close eye on Roch and his facility. After nearly 8 years of abuse, Maurice Grenier finally had enough with Roch and demanded to leave, which he surprisingly allowed, but under the caveat that she agreed to leave behind her oldest daughter, as she was being primed to be Roch's newest wife when she was of age. She left with the 2 of her remaining children and went back to the real world. And after a few months, with help from the local Children's Aid Society, she was primed to try to strike down Roch and end his little regime. After confessing about the way the children lived to the Children's Aid Society, they had enough evidence to come down and take away all of the children and put them into foster homes. After they had been shipped to these homes, it was there that they spoke of blood sacrifices Roch did. At one point, they killed a goat that one of the children raised from its birth in front of a group of kids, and then Roch would bathe in its blood in front of them. There are reports of sexual rites of passage for the children, with Roch and his son Roch Jr. commonly molesting children. Even with all of this though, the court only ordered an assessment on the anthill kids. 2 men were hired to do the assessment, Dr. Rial Hunault and Dr. Martin Mikhailovich. They both came back with a 300-page report that celebrated Roch's pioneering spirit and his advanced take on sexual teaching. And not only that, they accused the government of prosecuting them and denying them well-deserved welfare. What a crock of shit. What I find more surprising than any of that is just how much Roch must have charmed these 2 men for the 2 of them to draft up a 300-page report. I don't know how commonly large these reports are, but 300 pages to me sounds ridiculous. The Children's Aid Society launched its own look into Roch and his personal life, but Roch put up a farce and acted as sweet as he could to anyone and everyone who came by the community. Thankfully, the court saw through all of this and rejected the report. They claimed Theirault to be a manipulative despot and posed a significant risk of molestation and exploitation to any children around him. Thankfully, all of the children were kept in foster homes, but this doesn't mean that Roch was done with the adults in his group, and they would suffer the worst of it. During all of the troubles with the Children's Aid Society, Roch came into contact with a man by the name of Jess Grosbeck, a Latter-day Saints president and a forensic psychiatrist as well. They bonded over their shared views of polygamy, and Roch was becoming increasingly curious about Mormonism. Grosbeck, later down the line, would prove to be a catalyst for one of Roch's most horrible deeds. Life continued to worsen for the adults left over. His punishments were becoming harsher by the day. A man by the name of Claude Roulette was forced to wear a rubber band around his scrotum for a whole day and night. This did irreparable damage to his groins, which would leave Roch no option but to operate on the man. He cut him open with a dull razor blade, and removed one of his testicles with his bare hands, and then he would heat a piece of iron with a blowtorch and cauterize the wound. After the surgery, Roch held a vote to have the man stoned to death for somehow offending God. Thankfully, the vote failed. He commonly broke the followers' bones, and he beat poor Nicole to the point where she miscarried one of her children. As well, people were commonly shot with rifles, most notably a .303 caliber rifle. People were stabbed with shards of glass, and Roch would throw his hunting knives at the women, using them for target practice. Unsurprisingly, Roch moved past just bodily surgery. He began dental work as well, as a man such as himself couldn't stick to just one field of medicine. He commonly pulled people's teeth out with a pair of pliers. With all of this abuse and the poor hygienic conditions they lived in, it comes to no surprise that sickness was common. Selene fell ill, and Roch, being the man of medicine he was, diagnosed her with a kidney problem. He gave her an enema of molasses, oil, and water. After the enema was finished, he cut open her stomach and removed a random piece of her intestines. After this, he proclaimed that she was cured. She wasn't. She had been mutilated, and the self-proclaimed medicine man lost his patient the very next day. She died by a condition known as peritonitis, a condition in which your digestive fluids slowly leak into your abdominal cavity. Your own bodily acids slowly killing you. What a horrible way to go for her. Roch wasn't going to let her just go, though. He wasn't just a medicine man. He was a medicine man of God, gifted with the divine rights to resurrect people, or so he claimed. I'm going to give everyone listening a little forewarning before we get to the next part of the story. Up until now, Roch has been a truly disgusting individual, but I find that the next part of his story is the most deeply disturbing thing that the man has ever done. And as well, one of the most disturbing things I have ever heard a man do. After the death of Selene, Roch met up with his friend Grosbeck, whom he told the story to with a bit of falsehood added in for good measure. In Roch's tale, it was an erupting vein that killed the woman. Grosbeck would reassure Roch, and after this, Roch told of the dreams he was having. Selene was inside of his body, most notably inside of his semen. Roch was convinced that he was pregnant with her departed soul, and he had the necessary tools to bring her back to life. He had Alex Joseph perform a post-mortem marriage between him and Selene. The body was dug up and vinegar was poured on it to keep insects away. Then it was buried once again. After a few short days, Roch dug up the body once more and laid her out on a table. Then he began the ritual to bring his late wife back to life. He took a hand drill and bored deep into her skull with it. Afterwards, he would masturbate into the newly made hole. Giselle told Roch shortly thereafter that Selene wished to be cremated. Roch agreed to this, but he took a rib of hers and kept it with him at all times. As well, he would be the one to keep the ashes. He preserved them with olive oil and regularly ejaculated into them to make sure that the resurrection process was still on track to happen. After the death of Selene, things were quickly beginning to fall apart for Roch and his little community. He entrusted Grosbeck with one of his sons, but the two had a falling out shortly thereafter. Others would begin to run away from the community, and Roch's final act of cruelty would be done to poor Gabrielle. She was complaining of an aching finger, so Roch figured surgery was the only means of treatment. But he couldn't just take the finger. Roch took a knife and stabbed her hand down. As well, he pinned down her shoulder and elbow. Then, after cutting away the flesh connecting her arm to her shoulder with a carpet knife, he took a meat cleaver and swung once. He missed. But the second time, he amputated her entire arm in one clean blow. Apparently, Gabrielle was quiet during the whole operation. Gabrielle fled 2 times after the operation, once to a local women's shelter, but she was convinced to come back after Jocks had talked her into it. And the second time, she fled out into the wilderness, though she came back on her own volition once she realized that insects were beginning to lay eggs into the wound she bore. Roch would cauterize the wound with a piece of hot iron. Finally, Gabrielle would leave for the last time to a local hospital. She lied about a vehicle accident she was part of to explain the missing arm, but they saw through this and a warrant for Roch's arrest was made shortly thereafter. Roch was hunted down for a total of 6 weeks before they finally caught him, and his trial was quick and to the point. Roch was sentenced to life in prison with chance of parole in 1999. Thankfully, this was overturned. A few of his wives stayed loyal to him throughout the years, even while he was imprisoned, though Roch Theirault would find his end on February 26, 2011, stabbed to death by a fellow inmate. A fate too tame for someone so vile. Hello again, guys, and thank you for watching another one of my videos. If you're interested in the Theirault case at all, I highly recommend the book Savage Messiah. It's hard to find a copy in English, though I'm sure you could find one if you hunt it down. All the music supplied in this video is from Coag Music. You can find a link to his YouTube channel down in the description below. Apologies for how long it took to get the second part of Theirault's story out. I had some complications with Filmora, and I ended up buying Vegas Studios to, well, finish the video. Either way, there's more and some new stuff is coming. I'm going to be very happy when you guys get a chance to see it. As well, there will be a couple of changes in the format accompanying the next video that comes out. So please subscribe to see more. But until then, stay safe everyone, and I wish you all a pleasant evening.